Let's talk about guards. German longsword versus Italian longsword. Within those, there are variations. Different manuscripts show different versions, there's different interpretations, etc., etc. But we just want to compare a little bit, good and bad things about it, or things you can do from there. Why don't we start high up? So, roof guard of some variety, whether it be here or here or here. It can vary a little bit exactly how you hold it. What would be the equivalent?
All this, so in Italian systems, in the Bolognese tradition, there is a guard here called Guardia Alta. Filippo Vadi, who was a master in 1470s, who published a book in that time, called this the Falcon Guard, Guardia di Falcone. Got a little bit of fame in the movie Kingdom of Heaven. They mentioned this Falcon Guard, that's that idea, and it serves a lot of very similar purposes. It is a guard that strikes often in circular blows from above. Fiore has his highest guard is done this way with the point down, so that allows the weapon to come from below or from above, but also is representative of this action of moving the weapon around and behind the body, so maximizing the power as well as fully clearing this space between us. So it's, here if I'm kind of making these shorter, smaller cuts, not going through that guard, the arms are more potentially exposed versus in a position where I'm creating more power, but I'm also taking my arms out of this offensive space. So yeah, all those guards exist and they serve almost the exact same purposes.
It's not necessarily a static position that you just stay in, but a point in the movement pattern of, for example, an attack, where you go perhaps from here. There's all guards along this trajectory, right? So of course you got Wrath Guard, and can be in, again, various different interpretations. Some look a lot more like what Fiore shows. It's kind of quite retracted. Others are just a little bit. Is this, tip can be further down or further up, but either way, some version like this where you're primed for an attack. You've got your sword and your arms withdrawn, so from here you can launch a powerful attack.
Yeah, and even Fiore shows, even just within his corpus of manuals, we see everything from a reverse-weighted weapon fully chambered to a more forward-weighted weapon to a more sword rolled forward. So we see all of this variance, even just within one manuscript. So we recognize, Fiore is recognizing, as we would now as practitioners, that there's times when I want to generate more power or perhaps create more distance away. There's times when I may want to make my weapon more proximal, so it moves a little faster to the opponent or to the defensive space, but gives up some power to do so. And as you mentioned, there's the end point. There's, me making a very short cut gets to essentially this right side high guard just with a shortcut. But if I make a really powerful cut, then I just, in the action of where I'm going to come through, this is going to be chambered much more deeply.
As you approach the opponent, you might change it. Like, for example, you might have this guard running further away, but as I'm approaching, I might want to bring it forward because now there's much less time. Because if we start to approach the time of the arm, where all you have to do is this, then you can't afford to be all the way here because I can just get popped right away. So I need to be further away for this, so then I can step into it, and it makes a whole lot more sense. Whereas closer up, I might need it here, so I'm able to defend. Is there an equivalent to plow guard?
Yes, and again, it's interesting to think about traditions. In Italian fencing, there are many different traditions. So there is, in sort of Fiore's tradition, or how we do it in Duello Armatari, there is short guard, posta breve, so posta just means position. And so breve, or the short position, is often held on the center as opposed to the left or to the right. There are some people who might still call these forms of breve, and I would say generally my predilection, and I say this is true of a lot of Italian schools, is to hold to the center so that I have equal strength from both sides of my body. If I bring the weapon with my arms to my left side or to my right side, I weaken one side while strengthening the other. And so even my instinct, if I wanted to oppose you more strongly to the right, I would actually just do that by turning my body. So it's actually still on my center, and I've just faced into the crossing. fact, even if I was going to do something more like Flug, if I wanted to use the false edge here, I would still do it by turning my body to this side, or by turning my body to this side, versus literally placing the weapon to my side.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, there is a place where, even in Italian arts, that I might, if we were very deep and I needed to withdraw my strength, and so I needed to use my hands. So if you were cutting to me here at this distance, and I needed to come back, then I might do this. But also notice, it's actually still on my center. I'm not like this.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm here. And again, it's because I want to always be equally balancing both sides of my body, so I have a structural advantage here. If I'm here, there's actually, especially if that blow came very strongly, and if you deviated up into the weak of my sword, much easier for this to become collapsed. But if I turn my body into it, much easier for me to brace the weapon and create that strength.
I suppose you could also kind of cross more like that. You could absolutely use plow this way, so where the blade crosses and it's more forward.
The way that I would think about things is also interesting when we think about like the angle of the weapon here. So I would generally, even if I was going to form a breve to my outside, I would do it this way, pointing out. And even if I use a thumb grip, I would actually turn out with the point out because of that slope. So when I look at a guard, if I see a guard angled this way, I actually see this as the weak side. So it can be, we can get a feeling like, okay, I'm making a strong guarding of this side. Feeling like there's this wall here, but this wall is a collapsible wall because when it angles in, the mechanics of both the wrist and the way that the slope of the blade works, when you meet a force to the outside here, that force is going to drive your weapon down. And so if we want to be strong to that side, we actually need to turn and bring the point over that side. So even if I was forming a plow guard, I would do it with the point to my outside. And if I was going to do a plow guard to the inside, I would do it with my point crossing to my right. So I'm actually crossing a little bit. So if the attack is coming here, I end up actually being channeled down as opposed to being able to push through it.
Don't want that. Well, okay, unless it's an invitation.
Right, unless it's an invitation.
I expect.
Right, and then your goal is to, that's right.
Yeah, but it needs to be deliberate.
That's right, it needs to be deliberate. And we have to watch out sometimes, so if it's an invitation and we recognize the consequences of it, good. But sometimes people, I'll comment on this weakness and they'll say, well, I have this answer. If you have an answer that I can always make you do, it's not so much an answer as an easy pattern, right? So if I can, then I'll just come with some force to make you yield, and then as you make this very large action, my counter will be much, much shorter.
Often a concern whenever you have to wind up like this. This is a strong position for defensive purposes, but the problem is like the arms get really exposed.
Right,
generally.
they can. There's all of these openings to that side.
It's like if anything over here, it's like this is all exposed. So that's plow. Well, I mean, long point. Like some version of long point seems to exist in like anything.
Right.
You know, whether it be Western, Eastern.
In some way, whether we're fencing here or just cutting to there or through there, yes.
You keep the blade in front of you, you're protected, you can launch a thrust from there with a lunge, you can, there's plenty of things you can do, just cut not so much because you're already extended, like this is basically the midpoint of a cut or the end point.
It is, you know, if we think about the proximity of actions from here, when the weapon is spent, then obviously its most direct action is the thrust, so it is not spent for a thrust, it's spent for a cut. But then we can think about cuts from here are all based on the size of the turn we need to make in order to do them. So there is a turn where I can just re-angle the blade, so I could make a slice to you. You know, if I turn, I could slice, push, or press the hands, that kind of thing, like in German traditions also show up in Italian traditions. I could make a half circle, and I can of course make a full circle, each of those being more powerful but more time. And so I have to know anything I do from here that isn't just keeping the sword exactly as it is will take more time.
Yeah.
Whereas these are ready to do those actions.
Yeah, or you can even shorten your reach from here and cut that way.
Right.
If someone comes in, you just pull it in and there's still a cut here. But depending on which source you go by, how do you position it? Do you position it this way? That way? That generally seems a bit stronger to me because you're using the guard better to defend.
In Italian traditions, we get both those things as well. So certainly in Fiore, we have posta longa, so it's like longenort. So it's got that same kind of idea. And here I would turn my edge depending on which direction I was going to be seeking opposition, just to align the bones of my arm with that edge. And so I'm collecting, I'm pointing towards the side that I want to control. This idea of pointing, as well as in one of the people who says it most clearly is Meyer. So in the German tradition, where he says against any cutting attack, we can make straight bearing against it. So straight bearing is this idea of aligning the long position to point at the line of the cut. And we see that in a lot of Italian traditions. It certainly gets most explicit in like that time, same contemporaries to Meyer, and into like rapier texts. Earlier medieval traditions don't talk about it very much, but we do have these positions. Fiore comments that this comes to test the guards. So I'm using long position to test the guards, to lure them into my traps. And that could be both passively, meaning it's pretty, if somebody walks towards you with their sword out, it's actually not very passive,
no.
But it also could mean I'm going to stick my sword in your face and see what you do, draw a reaction from you. But we actually have in the Bolognese tradition, so from the schools around the Bologna area, so Morozzo, Manciolino, these gentlemen from the early 1500s, they show us some positions with a thumb grip type thing too. So sometimes people want to say, oh, this is the German grip, this is the Italian grip. I just think it just didn't slot down in those ways. Different teachers from different areas had different ideas, and certainly here, to me, there is a time to be in this extended grip, there's a time to be in a chambered grip, and there's a time to be in a thumb grip, and we want to be able to move between them. When we're in a thumb grip in a thrusting guard, the benefit is that it gives, in a way, an equal capacity for us to cross with the point to either side, which allows us to collect on either side. Yeah. The danger is that because this sword doesn't have any rings here, it exposes the hand more for actions coming over the hilt. And so when we turn the edge, then we actually use the deflecting power of the width of the blade to push the opponent's sword away. And one theory around why we start to get more rings is that actually some of the first even two-handed swords that we talked about them earlier, is the S-stocks, which are very narrow blades. And as the blade gets narrow, suddenly we start seeing rings. And it's probably because the blade itself is no longer deflecting the sword away from the hand. Right. So we have to put some hardware on there. And then of course rapiers have narrower blades than longswords, so they also need that hardware. Because we had arming swords, single-handed swords, and we even know were used for a lot of thrusting, didn't have rings for a long time, but very wide. There's a time when I feel like I need to switch very rapidly, and I feel like I can make some high covers. We have, this is guardia di faccia in Morozzo's tradition, so similar following can be done on either side. Then I might make this thumb grip type shape. But if I feel that I need to have more deflection, or I want more downward suppression, or even upward lift, then I'm going to be more inclined to align the heel of my hand to that edge, because I want to push that away. And here the thumb grip is I can make thumb grips here and thumb grips here, so again, kind of using that idea. But there's a time when I actually want to push them away more upward, so I'm going to align that edge to do that. And so we see that in German manuals and Italian manuals. So we can see there's obviously there's not like a dogmatic, we are good Germans, we use thumb grip, or we are good Italians, we use this. It's much more, what are we applying in these times? And perhaps certain masters preferred to get themselves into certain positions more than others. And so, okay, we see the thumb grip more here because those masters are wanting to use this cutting action more. And then we see this extended grip because we are seeing more collecting and oppositional thrusting from another set of masters. And then of course, with some people who are more prolific, like Meyer is a good example, we see all of the things because he's trying to use all the things. And Morozzo and a lot of the Bolognese guys also do all the things.
Lower guards,
yeah.
Like some version of what I would call fool's guard that exists again in like pretty much all forms of sword fighting, at least from what I've seen. It's just this, it invites an attack, and you're primed, you're ready to respond to it. You can either raise up to guard, or you can strike it aside and counter it. That's the same thing. And
we have the same, and it's interesting, there's some researchers doing a little bit of work on the etymology, and they think it's possible that it wasn't Alber the Fool, but it was actually a German word that meant tree. and that it was actually the rooted guard. This is another thought of that the etymology might be different. And it's also, we have parallel etymologies that sometimes come because words sound similar to one another as well. So that's just interesting to think about. But we have the same thing. So this is the middle iron gate in Fiore's system. It also shows up in, this is Porta de Ferro Larga, so this is the wide iron gate in the Bolognese tradition. We have guards to the side as well, so these are like we have Nebenhut and Schrankhut and things in German schools. We have these same things as the boar's tooth shows up. And so in Fiore, he just called this the boar's tooth, but the Bolognese called this the wide boar's tooth. And this would be kind of the plow-like position would be the short boar's tooth. When I come to the middle iron gate, you can see the pivot of my hip. I'm actually just orienting my hip towards you. And if I make the full iron gate, as Fiore would call it, then my hip is more open to the right. I've done that by switching my feet or turning the hips even more. So again, my belly button is pointing in this direction, and that's what brings the sword to the side. So that also means my hips are always ready to add their power to that and to turn my structure in that direction. So Fiore talks about the ones on this side being more defensive positions, so the iron gate idea, and the ones on this side being more thrusting and deflecting positions, so ones where I cast the weapon away, and the ones on this side being ones where I might beat you down or collect the sword. So more complete covers from this side and more coming in behind them, because it's my dominant hand, I'm kind of placing you behind my back to open up here.
Over the shoulder view, so if I come in with a cut like this, by the way, this would be really dumb to come in on that, because I know exactly that's what it wants. But just so you see what this is intended as, this, right? So deflects off to the side, and then I'm just wide open here because this pushes my blade all the way over. It's going to take me way too long to come back to that.
Add another force vector. So you're coming down, I add a little bit of horizontal movement, and so you keep going down, but just I'm no longer involved. Now, of course, I still like to move a little bit, just in case it doesn't go as I expect, or if you seek to bind with me.
Whereas if you have the blade on that side, it would look different. So if I now cut here, then there's the gathering here.
Yes, so I'm right in that. Or if I wanted to collect, if we did the same thing again.
Yep, it's right here on the guard, solid.
Or to enter in underneath the sword, yeah.
Yeah. So it depends on exactly what you're intending, whether you're here or here. Like this is, again, it's more of a, and this is also something to look out for. If you see the opponent, like not every low guard is the same. If they're here, then yeah, you might not want to cut in on that. Although if it's here, they can still, counter parry.
One thing I think is interesting when we think about low guards, you said, this would be kind of foolish of me to do this. And when we look at guards in isolation, they can seem more like sucker plays. If I'm here and I just go, come on. This has too much of that feeling of like, why am I going to do this? You're probably, if you're an experienced swordsman, you'll throw a feint of some kind into this action. But if we change the action just a little bit, where I am cutting at you and you just evade this, and now you cut at me, now, right, so I came to the guard, but in a way that was buried a little bit deeper in the action. And so because we're fighting, and this could be maybe 3 or 4 actions deep, maybe we've dealt with a few blows, you just dodged out of the last one, my sword, and you thought, oh, it's my moment, and you make the attack, and then now you fall into the play because of that action. Or maybe even in a situation where perhaps I cut a reverse at you and you parried me forcefully, right? So you beat me down this way, and I was here, and now you're going to come back to cut at me. Right now you just didn't clear me as far as expected, so you've beat me into the boar's tooth. And so we're also training it as a guard so that when we are there, not by our own volition, we've trained reactions that help me act appropriately from there.
One particular danger that you kind of need to be aware of when being in a low guard, the thrust can actually kind of block this. So if you thrust over top here, I might not be able to do much about it.
True.
So I would need to see that soon enough, because otherwise I'll just be pinned here. Once it's in my body, I can't exactly displace it, or if I do, I'm going to rip a chunk of flesh out. So.
Yeah, and even just by virtue of the angle of my sword, if I step to the side here and place myself over, if you rise up into my weapon now, I'm already crossing over top of your sword, so I have this mechanical advantage over you as well.
Exactly.
So there is a risk to being low. But one thing people don't like is if you're down there still, one thing I'm worried about if I am too hesitant here is you might cut or thrust up at my hands. And that will take away much of the threat of my attack if you lop my hands off. And you don't even really need to do, if we're thinking of just being in gloved hands, it wouldn't take very much for a nice sharp sword to snick off a few fingers.
Just this is all it takes.
Yeah, it does not take some giant motion to do enough damage to at least make you regret holding a sword that day.
Right, another low guard would be barrier guard, Schrankhut in German. So you have it on either this side or that side with a thumb grip. So that way you can deflect, for example, like there, wait for this, and then come into a shield how other side as well. Is there anything similar?
Yeah, it really, those things live within the boar's tooth, the iron gate,
yeah,
and not done
similar,
so
but not
thumb gripped. I would say that things like really a crosswise strike like a krumpau kind of idea there is those ideas in Italian fencing. They're typically called breakings. So rompere is the Italian verb for that, to break something. They work similarly, except I'm not crossing in this way where I'm sort of creating that space. They tend to all really predispose to being on the center line and a little bit more point forward than reaching back. I think that's something that, at least within the Liechtenauer tradition, something that's pretty special to that area and doesn't seem to show up in quite the same way within the Italian tradition. There is an idea that is probably the most similar, and it could be done from a low guard, which is called false point, or punta in falsa, or impuntare is to throw the point in. And that is where we make an action, like if you have your sword out or you're seeking to parry, where I reach around behind. But it has also a krumpau-like action, which is where I throw the weapon and I turn the false edge deliberately to cross over your weapon. And I could do it from here. But note that I didn't sort of set myself up in the thumb grip first to cross, and I would do it with the false edge, whereas technically here you're doing that with the true edge, the long edge, in the German style.
That actually also exists in German,
Right.
Sturzhau, or plunging cut, where you just come in like this. So yeah, there's just a lot of similarities.
Yeah, and in the Italian ones, generally, like Morozzo describes, like if you are going to parry this action, so we've got that, is he actually describes throwing the sword to this side of their face so that they parry it across their own face.
Which also, again, exists, like duplieren or doubling.
Like duplieren, yeah. Except instead of coming, it's just, we could actually have it from a bind, so this really has a feeling like a duplieren, but often done within it's sort of more of a mutieren of a sort, where it is actually transforming during, that's right, yeah. But it does also happen from the bind too.
Rear-facing guards, like a tail guard.
Yeah, and it's called tail guard in Italian as well as coda lunga. Yeah. So Fiore refers to this as a tail guard, but in the Bolognese tradition they refer to anything that is on this side as a tail guard. I think it's probably one of these things where a mnemonic starts from a particular idea, that is tail guard because like a tail, and then it's on this path of the reverso line, and so at some point some teacher says, well, what about anything that's on the path of the reverso of this backhand line is actually part of the tail guard family, and then they get labeled as high tail guard, narrow tail guard, long tail guard, and extended tail guard.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it stopped being connected to the mnemonic being about the position. And I'm sure a teacher then might say, some student might, why do you call it tail guard? And he says, well, it's like the wagging of a tail. They could probably, give some idea of that how they're connected. But often terms start to disconnect from their original etymological roots.
Yes.
So that's kind of neat to see.
What applies to any other rear-facing guard is the same here. We already said about whether it's here or here, it's the same kind of principle.
Yes. Yeah, we in the duello armitsari approach, we tend to essentially categorize guards into quadrants, and then whether they are point forward or point away. And so we really, every quadrant, because the offensive and defensive potential of a particular quadrant is the same, regardless of what name somebody uses to apply to that. And so then we just need to consider what's the most direct offensive action from that quadrant, what's the most direct defensive action from that quadrant. And then we just essentially have, is it lying in potential or is it lying with immediate threat? And to recognize that there are some guards that lie with potential in the upper right quadrant. So this window guard is an upper right threat, but right now it is a left quadrant thrust. So I might need to consider, I've got to think about both those aspects, but I can use the idea that I know of this guard, and the idea that I know of this position to tactically approach that.
Right, that's one I forgot. What would be ox in the
Right.
German tradition? There's so many different variations, like whether it's further out or further in, or some like to use it like this rather than with the thumb grip, and on each side like this. And this looks quite similar.
Yeah, so
really, it's just it's a different angle, I guess.
Yeah, we get different shapes. So there could be, all these are all window guards, so fenestra. And so we might have something where I am like reverse weighted and I'm crossed my body. So this is kind of like I'm making a defense or a deflection. So I'm looking through the window. It could be extended, like the end of a true edge cut from this side, or coming up to make a thrust, so it's extended there. It might be very square to you like this, or slightly angled to you, again following the hips to make that action. But generally, if I were cutting a horizontal blow, it would look very much like ox. But if I was cutting a rising blow, then, well, it would look like a different type of ox. But this is sort of the more window guard that we see, cutting between the windows. One thing Fiore says is the window guards move between each other. So we have this kind of moving between each other and this kind of moving between each other. And that, he says, those are a deceptive action as they move from one window to the other. What about Schlüssel?
Funny you would say that. I literally was just thinking of that, because that's something a little bit different.
A really interesting sort of guard, yeah. And sometimes also even shown
forward weighted.
This is another that we see of Schlüssel, where the left hand comes over the right. Not anything like that in any of the Italian manuals. But they do show up in a few different German manuals. Where we get some of that in Fiore's tradition is we have, I consider it within sort of a family of bicornu, the two-horn guards, where we actually have some of these alternate hand positions. It's shown a lot in Meyer, but also in Meyer and a few different manuals, I think probably a bulk of them. But we might get there by rotating here. It allows me to make a much higher position with the sword while having a mechanically stronger grip than being here, which is quite weak in both hands. It allows me to use the two horns to give me cover while I reach around your sword. Even if perhaps you've made a cut towards me, or if we're extended out here, you might start to oppose this thrust at you, but I might use the bicornu position to reach around that. We see something similar in Meyer, where he makes a cut in this way and then turns. He has one which he does in the parting strike like this, and then we also see where he switched the hands right.
It does make sense, because as you move it up, the hand kind of shifts automatically, so it does make sense to do that. I've even seen it with a finger over the guard like that.
Sure, yeah.
That kind of makes it pivot a little bit better.
Yeah, and being able to move around the pommel and be able to shift to those positions, especially to be in that position and then come away from that position, is a pretty vital part of being able to walk around your sword. And one thing I don't want to do is put myself in a position I can't easily get out of.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because a lot of this is just flow. Like you don't just stiffly stay in one guard and you approach, and that's it. Like, you tend to move. Say you're in one guard, maybe the opponent assumes a guard that would directly counter what most of the things you can do from here. Then you might be like, oh, actually, no, never mind. I don't want that. And then the opponent might adjust to that, and then so you might.
And that was a bit of a dance there.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Italian fencing that comes to be called contrapostura, counter posture. Yeah, and it really developed strongly into the constraining idea, is a type of later contraposture. Fiore just simply says, if somebody takes a guard, if you take the exact same guard, then you are countering it. Because all guards are, as he says, their own counters. Because if you take a right side guard, if I take a right side guard, I am opposed to it. Right? So it's kind of, and to me, that's like a beautiful, simple rule to say to a student who's pretty new, what do I do against the guard? Well, you can always just take the same guard. And you'll know you'll be in front of their action.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah. And later, that same idea, contrapostura, starts to mean any guard specifically that is designed to constrain a guard. So later in Italian fencing, you being there, this would be the contrapostura to it. If you're on the right shoulder, I would constrain it by my angle, would be the contrapostura to that section. Yeah. One thing I was thinking about with Schlussel that's interesting is some of the ideas of things like Schlussel are to create these crossing positions over the weapon. And that is something that sometimes this angled fenestra does in the Italian system, where especially if I lift it up, this looks very open under the weapon. But I've created this angle over that side, and that actually gives me a lot of mechanical advantage over it. So any attack you make under my sword here, I just need to turn my true edge and close that space.
By the way, to anyone who's categorically opposed to parrying with the edge, notice how the strong of the blade is being deployed. In other words, not damaging the sword's offensive capability in any way.
So against this rising cut, if you made a middle cut to me here, it's the same action. If you made a thrust towards me here, the same action. So just this rolling and turning action closes all of those lines, one simple action. And sometimes the German Schlussel plays that sort of role. It is the key, which is where that word is, that unlocks a lot of these actions. And the turning of the key, I think, is where they're talking about this. Schlussel rotates like a key does. And so this is something that the fenestra guards do. They rotate and turn and close. So again, they live in slightly different places, but some similar ideas across these different schools. And certainly, Fiore said, I studied with many German and Italian masters. Meyer talks about we need defense in these ways because I've studied the Italian systems. So these areas are not distinct like we think of them now in their national boundaries as we see them today.
Oh yeah, there's definitely cross-pollination. And also, of course, the usual thing where there's only so many effective ways you can use this. Different flavors, if you will, but like a lot of the basic mechanics, especially when it comes to footwork, the mechanics are they sort of overlap.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes down to it, I think when we talk about certainly expert swordsmen, I can tell you that I can have a very strong opinions about good ways and bad ways to do things. But those do tend to be things that are more subtle in a certain way, fundamental, I would say, but they are not things that are necessarily obvious to the first person who picks up a sword. A lot of those people are going to do very similar things. We give some rando a sword now, I think probably giving some rando a sword then, they probably would intuit a certain types of actions that would come out of the sword. And it's an interesting thing when we work from manuals. I think part of the reason these masters are spending time talking about these guards is they're trying to convey some of the special things to us, some of the nuances, some of the things that the rando didn't think about with those guards. And that will hopefully give their students an edge over all of those passionate beginners out there.
Yeah. All right, that covers a lot about guards. Hope you found it interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Quick shameless self-promotion. Join my Patreon. It makes you 690% cooler. The statement is not supported by science.